It always begins softly, almost too softly to notice. An empath sitting quietly in a room full of noise, carrying burdens no one else will carry, listening to words that cut but pretending they don't bleed. They give, and they give again, until giving becomes their entire identity. At first, it feels noble. At first, it feels like love. But time has a way of revealing truths the heart doesn't want to face. Because slowly, almost invisibly, the empath begins to realize that what they call love is often just sacrifice. What they call loyalty is often just endurance. What they call kindness is sometimes just self-erasure. Carl Jung once said that every person carries a shadow, and the less it is acknowledged, the darker and heavier it becomes. For empaths, that shadow is this truth: they have limits. They have boundaries. They have a self that has been neglected for far too long. And no matter how much light they pour into others, the shadow follows them, whispering, reminding, insisting that there must be more to life than bleeding quietly for everyone else. At first, they silence that whisper. They push it down, convincing themselves that compassion means never saying no. That forgiveness means staying, no matter how much it hurts. That loyalty means burning in the fire if it keeps someone else warm. But over time, something shifts. The whisper grows stronger. The weight becomes unbearable. The shadow refuses to stay hidden. And then comes the moment that changes everything. It is not loud. It is not explosive. There is no scene, no fight, no dramatic final words. Instead, it arrives in silence. A simple decision, invisible to the outside world, but thunderous within. The empath walks away. Quietly. Without warning. Without apology. Without a single word left to explain. This silence is where the darkest revenge lives. Because those who fed on their light never expected it to end. They built their comfort on the assumption that the empath would always stay, always give, always endure. And now, with nothing but silence left behind, they are forced to confront a world without the one who carried their storms. The quiet exit is devastating because it offers nothing to resist. Anger can be argued with. Tears can be manipulated. Even hatred can be engaged. But silence cannot be touched. Silence leaves them alone with themselves. And for those who depended on the empath's endless supply of love, silence is the cruelest mirror of all. But here is the truth that matters most. The empath's exit is not truly about revenge. It is not about punishing those who took too much. It is about finally turning back toward themselves. Because when an empath leaves, the first person they meet again is their own soul. In the quiet that follows, something begins to shift. The noise of everyone else's needs fades away. The weight of everyone else's pain falls off their shoulders. And in that silence, the empath begins to hear something they had long forgotten. Their own voice. Their own laughter. Their own dreams, still alive, still waiting. This is where healing begins. Not in anger. Not in bitterness. But in the stillness of finally choosing themselves. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires embracing both light and shadow. For the empath, individuation means no longer being only the giver, the healer, the sacrificer. It means acknowledging that they too are human, with needs that matter, with wounds that deserve care, with boundaries that deserve respect. And so the quiet exit is both an ending and a beginning. It is the death of the role they were forced to play, and the birth of the person they were always meant to become. It is dark, yes, but in that darkness lies transformation. Imagine it: someone who once took you for granted wakes up to silence. They search for the comfort you once poured into them, but there is nothing. They reach for the warmth of your presence, but only absence answers back. For the first time, they feel the cold reality of life without you. And in that moment, they realize the truth. You were never just a background presence. You were the light itself. But while they sit in that emptiness, you are finally free. Free to breathe without guilt. Free to dream without interruption. Free to love without bleeding. Free to walk forward into a life that is no longer built on sacrifice. This is the hidden beauty of the empath's revenge. It does not destroy them. It rebuilds you. It does not punish with fire. It liberates with silence. It does not end the story. It begins a new one. And that is why the quiet exit is the darkest revenge. Because it is not meant to wound the other, it is meant to save the self. And nothing unsettles those who took you for granted more than realizing that you have finally chosen yourself. This is only the beginning. The first step into silence. The first breath of freedom. The first moment of seeing yourself not as a background character. The silence after leaving can feel strange at first. For an empath who has lived their life filling the air with care, with apologies, with endless reassurance, the absence of words can feel like a void. In the first days, there may even be guilt, a subtle voice whispering that maybe they should have stayed, maybe they were too harsh, maybe they should have given one more chance. But as the days pass, something begins to change. The silence, which once felt empty, slowly begins to feel like space. A vast, open space where the empath can finally breathe. For the first time in years, they are not drowning in someone else's needs. They are not defined by someone else's moods. They are not shrinking themselves to keep the peace. They are simply free. Carl Jung often spoke of the importance of individuation, of finding the self beneath the masks we wear for the world. For empaths, this mask has always been one of endless patience, endless giving, endless forgiveness. But in the quiet after the exit, the mask begins to slip away. And beneath it, something unexpected appears, not weakness, not anger, but strength. A strength that was always there, waiting beneath the surface, waiting for the moment it would finally be allowed to live. At first, this strength feels unfamiliar. The empath may not even recognize it as their own. They have been told for so long that their role is to serve, to heal, to be the light in other people's darkness, that the idea of existing for themselves feels almost selfish. But slowly, through silence, they begin to see that what they called selfishness is in truth survival. What they called cruelty is in truth self-love. What they once denied is in truth their wholeness asking to be acknowledged. And as this realization grows, something else begins to happen. The empath's body, which has carried years of unspoken stress, starts to soften. Their chest, once tight with unexpressed emotion, loosens. Their mind, once crowded with everyone else's problems, begins to quiet. They start to notice small things again, the warmth of sunlight on their skin, the taste of food when they are not rushing, the sound of their own laughter returning slowly, like an old friend they thought was gone forever. This is the secret power of the quiet exit. It is not just a withdrawal from others. It is a return to life. A return to presence. A return to self. And those who are left behind, they will notice the silence too. They will reach for the comfort that once came so easily, and find only absence. They will remember the patience that never ran out, and wonder why it suddenly disappeared. They will confront the truth that they never thought possible, that the empath they believed would always stay has finally chosen themselves instead. But here is the part most people don't see. While they are left spinning in their own emptiness, the empath is slowly growing into someone new. Someone who no longer fears boundaries. Someone who no longer apologizes for existing. Someone who has learned that compassion without balance is not kindness, but self-destruction. Carl Jung believed that every person must one day face their own shadow, the parts of themselves they denied for too long. For the empath, the shadow is not cruelty, but power. It is not hatred, but the right to say no. It is not selfishness, but the courage to walk away. And in the quiet after the exit, the empath finally begins to integrate this shadow. They do not become less kind. They become whole. They do not stop loving. They learn to love without losing themselves. They do not stop giving. They learn to give only from what overflows, never again from an empty cup. And this is where the quiet exit becomes more than revenge. It becomes transformation. Because revenge, in its purest form, is about hurting the other. But this silence is not truly about them. It is about you. It is about reclaiming your story, your voice, your life. It is about teaching the world that your presence was never to be taken for granted, that your love was never endless, that your soul was never a possession. And slowly, as you grow into this new version of yourself, you begin to see something even more profound. You begin to realize that the darkest revenge was never the absence you left behind for them. The darkest revenge is the radiant, undeniable presence you are becoming for yourself. This is the second step. The turning inward. The moment when silence no longer feels like emptiness, but like power. The moment when the empath begins to see that the real victory was not in walking away from them, but in walking back to themselves. There is a moment, weeks or months after the quiet exit, when the empath notices something remarkable. The world that once felt heavy, suffocating, impossible to carry, suddenly feels lighter. It is not that life has become easier. Challenges still exist. The shadows of memory still appear. But the chains that once bound their soul to other people's chaos have finally fallen away. And in that freedom, something begins to grow. A strength that is quiet, but undeniable. A presence that is soft, but unshakable. The empath begins to realize that they no longer bend so easily, no longer break so quickly, no longer doubt their worth with every breath. They are no longer defined by what others demand of them. They are defined by what they allow into their life. Carl Jung believed that the deepest work of the soul is to bring the unconscious into consciousness, to recognize the patterns that once controlled us, and to transform them into choice. For the empath, this means seeing clearly for the first time the cycle of giving and draining that once defined their existence. They begin to recognize the signs of manipulation. They begin to notice the subtle ways they were used. And instead of ignoring those signs, they meet them with clarity. With boundaries. With strength. This new strength does not roar. It does not shout. It does not demand to be noticed. It moves quietly, like the roots of a tree digging deep into the earth. Unshakable. Grounded. Patient. And because of this, it is all the more powerful. Those who once drained the empath may try to return. They may come back with apologies, with promises, with the same familiar tricks. But the empath is no longer the same. The silence has changed them. The absence has rebuilt them. And so what once felt impossible, saying no, refusing, walking away again, now feels natural. It feels necessary. It feels like truth. And here is where the darkest revenge deepens. Because those who once believed the empath's compassion was endless will find a new reality. They will face someone who is still kind, still loving, still gentle, but untouchable. No longer available to be drained. No longer willing to bleed for someone else's comfort. No longer afraid to choose themselves first. Imagine this transformation, once invisible, now unforgettable. Once silenced, now deeply grounded in their own voice. Once a background presence, now a force that cannot be overlooked. Not because they demand it, but because their very being radiates a strength that cannot be ignored. This is the paradox of the empath's quiet exit. The absence breaks the old pattern. But the return to self creates a presence that is more powerful than any confrontation, any revenge, any fight could ever be. Jung would say that the empath has begun to embody the self, the union of light and shadow, of compassion and power, of giving and boundary. They are no longer split, no longer torn between who they are and who the world wants them to be. They are whole. And wholeness, once claimed, can never be taken away. And for those left behind, this is the deepest wound of all. To look at the empath they once used, and to see them stronger, freer, brighter than ever before. To realize that their absence did not break you, it built you. To understand that the silence they thought was weakness has become the very foundation of your power. This is why the empath's quiet exit is the darkest revenge. Because it does not destroy you. It transforms you. It does not make you smaller. It makes you whole. And nothing unsettles those who once fed on you more than realizing that you are no longer theirs to consume. This is the third step. The rising of strength. The moment when silence becomes presence, when absence becomes power, when the empath finally stands rooted, unmovable, in the truth of who they are. There comes a day, after the silence has done its work, when the empath feels ready to step back into the world. Not as they were before, not as someone desperate to please, desperate to be loved, desperate to keep the peace, but as someone reborn. The difference is subtle at first. They walk into familiar spaces, speak to familiar people, and yet, everything feels different. The old pull to shrink, to soften, to make themselves smaller so others can feel bigger, it is no longer there. Instead, there is a calm strength, an inner knowing, a quiet refusal to abandon themselves ever again. Carl Jung spoke often of individuation as a return, not a rejection of who we were, but a reintegration of all the pieces we had once lost. And for the empath, this return is profound. Because they are still kind, still compassionate, still sensitive to the currents of emotion around them, but now, this sensitivity is balanced by something new. A clarity. A boundary. A selfhood that cannot be dissolved by the expectations of others. When they speak, their words carry weight. Not because they are loud, but because they are true. When they love, their love feels different. No longer a desperate giving away of self, but a sharing of fullness. A love that flows without fear, because it is rooted in strength rather than in sacrifice. And the world notices. People who once overlooked the empath now pause in their presence. People who once drained them now hesitate, sensing that the old patterns no longer work. People who once assumed the empath would always be available now feel the shift, and in that shift, they are confronted by the reality of their own emptiness. This is the deeper layer of the empath's revenge. Not only silence, not only absence, but transformation so undeniable that others cannot help but see it. The empath who once bent themselves into knots for love now walks with a quiet dignity that makes love seek them instead. The empath who once poured themselves out until empty now carries an overflow that cannot be ignored. The empath who once felt invisible now moves through the world as unforgettable. And still, the empath does not seek revenge. They do not carry bitterness in their heart. They do not walk with anger on their tongue. Instead, they embody something far more unsettling. They embody peace. A peace that cannot be bought, cannot be stolen, cannot be taken away. A peace that makes others wonder how they survived what should have broken them. This peace is not passive. It is active, alive, magnetic. It is the peace of someone who has walked through fire and learned not only how to endure, but how to rise from the ashes brighter than before. And this is the part of the journey Jung would call integration, the final weaving together of shadow and light. The empath no longer denies their compassion, nor their boundaries. They no longer fear their sensitivity, nor their power. They are whole. They are complete. They are themselves. For those who knew them before, this wholeness is a shock. For those who thought they owned their light, it is a loss. For those who doubted their strength, it is a revelation. And for the empath, it is freedom. Freedom to walk into the world without fear of being consumed. Freedom to love without fear of being lost. Freedom to stand in their truth without needing approval. Freedom to exist fully, without apology. And this freedom is contagious. Others will see it. Others will feel it. And quietly, without even trying, the empath will become a mirror for others who are still trapped in silence, still trapped in sacrifice, still trapped in the belief that their worth lies only in what they give away. The empath's quiet exit began as survival. It became revenge. But now, it becomes something greater. It becomes a light that guides others out of their own prisons. This is the fourth step. The return to the world. The moment when the empath's silence transforms into presence, when their absence becomes radiance, when their healing becomes a quiet revolution that ripples far beyond themselves. There comes a moment when the empath finally realizes that their silence is not weakness, it is wisdom. That their absence is not emptiness, it is protection. That walking away is not surrender, it is the highest form of strength. And in that moment, the game changes forever. At first, it may look like nothing happened. To outsiders, the empath's quiet exit seems ordinary, almost invisible. There is no dramatic confrontation, no explosion of rage, no desperate final plea. Just a slow and steady withdrawal, as natural as the tide leaving the shore. But beneath that silence, something monumental is taking place. The empath is reclaiming their soul. For so long, they lived in a cycle of giving, pouring themselves into others until they felt hollow. They believed that love meant sacrifice, that kindness meant self-erasure, that being good meant being available no matter the cost. People took advantage of this. Some knowingly, some carelessly. But the result was the same: the empath was left carrying everyone else's weight while drowning in their own. Carl Jung warned that when the soul is ignored, it rebels. The shadow begins to grow, whispering in dreams, rising in sudden bursts of exhaustion or sadness. For the empath, this shadow often took the form of quiet despair, a subtle knowing that they were losing themselves while trying to keep everyone else together. But when they finally listen, when they finally honor their own soul, everything shifts. The quiet exit is not just walking away from toxic people. It is walking away from an old self, a self that thought love had to be earned, a self that thought survival meant staying small. The darkest revenge is not about destroying others, it is about no longer destroying yourself for them. Imagine the one who once drained the empath. They wake up one day and realize the well has run dry. The endless comfort is gone. The gentle forgiveness is no longer offered. The soft shoulder to cry on is missing. At first, they are confused. Then, they are unsettled. And finally, they are haunted. Not because the empath punished them, but because the empath's absence reveals a truth they cannot face. They were never entitled to that love in the first place. This is the devastation of the quiet exit. It leaves no scars on the empath, but it leaves a permanent echo in the one who misused them. Silence becomes the mirror in which they finally see themselves, and not everyone can survive what they see. But the empath does not look back. They move into new spaces, new lives, carrying a different energy. They are no longer defined by the roles others forced upon them. They are no longer the rescuer, the healer, the constant giver. They have become whole. And wholeness changes everything. It gives the empath a new kind of power, not the loud, aggressive power of control, but the quiet, steady power of knowing. They know what they will no longer accept. They know where their boundaries begin. They know that their time and energy are sacred, not disposable. This knowing makes them untouchable. Not in the sense that they are unreachable, but in the sense that no one can exploit them again in the same way. They may still love deeply, but now they love wisely. They may still give, but only from abundance, never from depletion. They may still forgive, but not at the expense of their soul. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming fully oneself, was the highest task of life. For the empath, the quiet exit is individuation in motion. It is the refusal to remain trapped in patterns that diminish them. It is the decision to embrace their shadow, to face the truth of their own exhaustion, and to rise from it stronger. And here lies the paradox. What feels like revenge to the one left behind is liberation to the empath. What feels like punishment to the exploiter is healing to the giver. What looks like loss is actually the greatest gain. This is why the quiet exit is the darkest revenge. Because it does not rely on anger or cruelty. It does not seek to destroy. It simply reveals. It exposes the truth of imbalance, and in that exposure, everything crumbles for the one who took too much. And yet, for the empath, it is also the brightest beginning. The silence becomes space for growth. The absence becomes room for joy. The boundaries become the foundation for love that is real, equal, and nourishing. For the first time, they no longer need to be everything for everyone. They can simply be themselves, and that is enough. So the story ends not with fire, not with rage, but with peace. The kind of peace that is unshakable, because it is built from within. The empath no longer needs to shout to be heard. Their silence speaks louder than words ever could. And for those who listen closely, that silence says everything. It says, I am no longer yours to drain. It says, I am no longer afraid to walk away. It says, I am free. And in that freedom lies the final chapter. The empath has not just survived, they have transformed. They are no longer the fragile light that can be stolen. They are the flame that sustains itself. They are no longer the echo of others' needs. They are the voice of their own truth. The quiet exit was the darkest revenge, but it was also the greatest rebirth. And as the empath steps into that rebirth, the world can no longer touch them in the same way. They are untouchable. They are whole. They are finally home within themselves. And maybe that is the real ending. Not the downfall of the ones who lost them, but the rise of the empath who finally found themselves.